We're now at the bottom of Yud Ches Amud Aleph. The last four words on the Amud, the Gemara says, "V'lifku nami atamuz v'teves." To the same extent that you sent out shluchim for Av, so the people would know when is the fast day of the 9th of Av. Likewise, they should have been sending out shluchim in the month of Tammuz to notify the people when is the 17th of Av, the fast of Yud Zayin b'Tammuz. And Teves, we should also send out shluchim so the people would know when is the 10th of Teves. And here we start Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis. The Omer of Chana Bar Bizna, Omer of Shimon Chasida Maidet Siv, a pasuk in the 8th parak of Zechariah, with regard to the words of the Navi to those who were Golei Bavel. They were living in the exile of Babylonia, and they built in Yerushalayim the second Beis Hamikdash. Ko amar Hashem tzvakos, tzom revi v'tzom chamishi v'tzom hashvi v'tzom hasiri yia lebeis Yehuda lesason ulesimcha. Now that the Beis Hamikdash has been rebuilt, the second Beis Hamikdash, then these days of Tzom Revi means the fourth day of the month. You can't Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz. So Tammuz is the fourth month of the year. And the fast would be, we'll see about it, but let's say the 17th of Tammuz, that's the day of Huvka Ha'ir, when they broke through the siege into the city. Tzom HaChamishi is the month of Av, that's a reference to Tisha B'Av. Tzom HaShvi, the 7th month, is Tzom Gedalia in Tishrei. And all these days, which were days of tzomos, of fast days, so they were initially established as fast days after the Churban HaBayis, but now that the Bayis Sheni has been built to replace the first Bayis, those same days become days of celebration. Now, the language is very strange. The pasuk in Zechariah says Tzom Haravi, etc. Tzom Hachamishi. It should have said Yom Tzom, not the Tzom itself. Is correlate Tzom, correlate Sasa V'Simcha. There's an inner contradiction in this pasuk. You can't call it Tzom and call it Sasa V'Simcha at the same time. But what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to divvy up Jewish history at the periods of time. Zman Shei Shalom, when the Umas Ha'olam are not dominating Klal Yisrael, Yiu L'Sason U'Simcha, those days will be for happy joy. And by the way, as we'll soon see, there's an Isur of Hesped B'Tainis on these days. But Ein Shalom, if on the other hand, the nations of the world control us, they dominate us, then Tzom, these days will be obligatory as far as Tzom is concerned. So when the Beis HaMikdash is gone, and now the Umas Olam are Sholetes B'Yam Yisrael, then these are days of Tzom. And that's what the Mishnah is talking about. These are days of Tzom. However, we still get back to our original question. Okay, days of Tzom, but yet the month in which they sent out the shluchim was Chodesh Chodesh HaChamishi, which is Av. What about Chodesh Revi? What about Chodesh HaShvi? And Asiri, which is Asar B'Teves? None of those months require shluchim. So the answer is Amar Papa Hachi Komer. This is what Reb Shimon Chasida was deriving from the pasuk. Bisman Shei Shalom, when the nations of the world did not control and dominate the Jewish people, these periods of time are designated for celebration. That you're not allowed to be masked anyone. There's no kindness during that time. If there's Xeras Malchus, however, if the Malchus will be Gozer Xeras Rosh on Klal Yisrael Tzom, then we go to the other extreme. From celebration days and happy days, we go to solemn fast days. But what about in the middle? The twilight zone between these two extremes. on the one hand, Ein Gzeres Malchus, we're living in America and there's no Gzeres against us. But on the other hand, Ein Shalom. We don't have the Beis HaMikdash. Then, during that twilight zone where there's no Gzeres Malchus, but there's no Beis HaMikdash, so we don't know what to do. Should we commemorate these fast days because the Beis HaMikdash is lost, or should we say no? They're not really fast days; they're potentially happy days, and let's bless us lucky stars that they're not subjugating us. The law is Rotzu Misanim, Rotzu Ein Misanim. The fast day becomes optional, and they have the Rosh, they have the license not to fast, but to eat and drink. So Amish is talking about his mind where there's no shalom, but there's no gzeros. And therefore, all these tinios are simply voluntary. Rotzu misanim. In such a case, they wouldn't send out shluchim in order to guarantee that the whole nation of the people will know exactly when is the fast of Asar B'Teves or Shivas B'Tamuz or Tzom Gedalia. We didn't need shluchim because these days are voluntary fast. So the Gemara says, "Hihachi Tisha B'Av." Nami, why are we sending out shluchim in Tammuz? Why are we sending out shluchim in Av to notify the people when is the 9th of Av? The 9th of Av is also a voluntary fast day. What does that mean, huchpulu? Huchpulu means that there was a tzara that repeated itself a second time, but on the same day. So even though Shavas B'Tammuz, there are 5 different tzaras that we had, but there's no single tzara that occurred twice on Shavas B'Tammuz, as opposed to Tisha B'Av. Yom Mar, B'Tisha B'Av Chara Bayis Rishon, Ubayis Shniya. There were other terrible things that happened on Tisha B'Av, but the main thing is that the churban of both Bayis Rishon and Bayis Sheni took place on Tisha B'Av. V'nilkada Beitar, this great city of Beitar, was conquered and was full of Jews. V'nechresha Ir, and Yerushalayim was plowed, and it became like a Sada Charusha. But we're more machmir on Tisha B'Av because of Huchpalo Bo Tzaros. It means that whereas other fast days that we mentioned earlier are voluntary, Tisha B'Av is an absolute obligation, and therefore we have to send out the shluchim to make sure that the people knew during the month of Av exactly when Tisha B'Av was. Tanya, we went to the Brayso Rabbi Shimon, Arba Dvar Rabbi Kiva Dorish, Vani Eina Dorish Kimoso. There are 4 drashos, and Rabbi Shimon rejects. Now, it's not clear whether he rejects all 4 or he just rejects the last of the 4. And here's what Rabbi Akiva was saying about this pasuk in the 8th chapter of Zechariah that we just learned. Number 1, Tzom Haravi Zeh Tisha B'Tammuz. Rabbi Akiva's opinion is that on Tammuz we fast on the 9th of Tammuz. I'm kind of happy that we don't accept the halacha like Rabbi Akiva because that's my birthday. In any event, Shebo, what happened on the 9th of Tammuz? Bo Huvka Ha'ir. In other words, the city of Yerushalayim was surrounded by a protective wall. And at the time of the Churban Abayis, the first Beis HaMikdash, Nebuchadnezzar broke through the walls of Yerushalayim. And in Shenemar, we know this from Pasuk Yirmiyah, B'chodesh Haravi, 4th month, which is Tammuz, right? Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz. V'tishal HaChodesh, on the 9th of Tammuz, V'yetzak Hara'av B'ir, right? The city was under siege. There was no food supplies. People were dying of starvation. V'lohoylem lechem la'ma'aretz, V'tibaka Ha'ir. And they broke through the city walls. That took place on the 9th of Tammuz. And therefore, the 9th of Tammuz is a fast. My Korile Revi, Why does Zechariah Navi call it Revi? The answer is Revi L'Chadashim, because he's referring to the month of Tammuz, which is the 4th month of the year. Now Rabbi Kiva goes on. Som HaChamishi Zet Tisha B'Av Shebot Nisrach Beis Elokeinu. The Beis Hamikdash was set aflame on Tisha B'Av, and they established it as a fast. But my Kori Le Chamishi, again Chamishi L'Chadashim, because Av is the 5th of the month, 5th month. Tzom HaShvi Zeh Shlosha B'Tishrei Shvot Nera Gedalia Ben Achika. So this is what we call Tzom Gedalia. He had been appointed by Nebuchadnezzar as the Moshel, the governor, on those who were left in Eretz Yisrael after the Golus Bavel, those few Jews that were left. There's a pocket full of Jews at the time of the Churban Bayis Rishon. Umi Harago, and who killed him? Who put Gedalia to death? It was a Jew, Yishmael ben Nesanya. Interesting, Nesanya. I don't remember that name in Shas. Do you remember that name in Shas? Nesanya. The city of Netanya. Anyway, so Yishmael, who was from Zerah Malchi Beis David, and he was jealous of the fact that Nebuchadnezzar, of all people, had appointed Gedalia as the governor of Israel, and he was jealous. Harab, terrible, terrible tragedy. And again, this caused a great Peronius and Claudius. So that was a fast. They l'lamdecha sheshkula misasan shal tzadikim. Gedalia ben Achikim was a tzaddik, and his death is kisreifas beis Elokeinu. And therefore, this day on which Gedalia ben Achikim was murdered on the 3rd of Tishrei, that day was established as a fast. Shvi L'Chadashim, because Tishrei is the 7th of the month. Then it goes on to mention, Zechariah mentions Som HaSiri. Zeh Asara B'Teves. Yes?
He was murdered on actually the 2nd day of Rosh Hashana, but because it was a festival, we don't fast on that day. It was postponed to the 3rd.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Next, we get to Tzom HaSiri, Zeh Asara B'Teves, Shebo Samach Melech Bavel Nebuchadnezzar. And this is recorded in the book of Yechezkel, that Melech Bavel was Samach al Yushalayim. That's when the Matzor around Yerushalayim began. Shenemar, it says in the Nevuah of Yechezkel regarding the Matzor al Yerushalayim, the siege of Jerusalem, Vayhid Hashem Elai Bashana Atshiyis, in the 9th year, Hainu, he says here, Shana Atshiyis Legolus Yoyachun Umalchus Tzidkiyo Shemalach Tachtus. 9th year of the reign of Tzidkiyo. Tzidkiyo had a very tragic death. In any event, the Chodesh HaSiri, on the 10th month, which is the month of Teves, V'Asar LaChodesh, on the 10th of that month, Lemon. This was the nevuah that Yechezkel received from on high. Ben Adam Ksavlecha Es Shem Hayom Es Etzem Hayom Hazeh Samach Melech Bavel El Yerushalayim. On the 10th of Teves, God tells Yechezkel, who was, by the way, in Golus, Yechezkel himself was in Bavel, one of the rare cases of a nevuah in Chutzlah. Anyway, that today the Melech Bavel has begun his siege on Yerushalayim, and you, Yechezkel, are commanded to write this down, record it as a nevuah that was written and would be propagated and spread throughout Israel. So we see that on Asar B'Teves, the Melech Bavel began his matzar, his siege on Yerushalayim, and therefore they established the 10th of Teves as a Yom Tzom. In truth, a number of other things happened on the 8th of Teves and the 9th of Teves. But Chazal say that the 10th of Teves was established as a fast day. They couldn't establish 3 days of fasting. They should have fasted to the death of Ezra. and they should have fasted for the fact that Talmud Melech had the Torah, the Septuagint Torah translated to 70 languages, and so forth and so on. But that's Asar B'Tev. Am I correctly Asiri? Why does Zechariah call it Asiri? Asiri L'Chadoshim, it's the 10th month, the month of Teves. Now Rabbi Akiva explains the Seder, the sequence of these 4 tsomos. And he points out that l'chora there's a question to be asked of Halo Hayoroi Zeh Likos of Rishon. In chronological order, the first event that took place was on Asar B'Teves of all these events, when the siege began on Yerushalayim. So Lama Nichtav Kan, why is it written at the end of the pasuk in Zechariah? If historically it was first. Kedei lahazdir chadoshin ketikona. He's not interested in the chronological sequence of events, but rather in terms of the sequence of the months of the year. As in the Hebrew calendar, we will commemorate these days by fasting. Vani, says Reb Shimon, Eini Omer Kan. I'm not willing to accept your interpretation, Rabbi Akiva, of Tzom HaSiri, because if your interpretation is correct, then Zechariah, by referring to Tzom HaSiri, should have placed it at the very beginning. Meaning Rav Shimon rejects this explanation that Zechariah is only interested in the way the calendar flows, the 5th month, the 10th month, etc., etc. Ela Tzom HaSiri Zeh Chamisha B'Teves. It's on the 5th of the month of Teves, Shebo Bas Shmuel Legola. The Jewish people were by and large in Bavel, in Golis Bavel, and they were the ones who went into Golis Bavel together with Yehoyacham Melech Yehuda. That was before the Churban of the Bayis. And Huksa Ha'ir, at that moment, on the 5th of Teves, the people in the Golis, the Bnei Gola in Bavel, they got the word Shehuksa Ha'ir. In other words, that the city of Jerusalem was conquered and the people were put to death. Shenemar, as it says in Yechezkel, again, while Yechezkel, as I said before, is in Bavel at that time, Vayhi b'shtemes reishana ba'asiri b'chamisha l'chodesh. So we're talking about ba'asiri, which means in the month of Teves, and on the 5th of the month, the goal is saying, Ba Elaya Polit Yushalayim. Yechezkel testifies that one of the fugitives came from Yushalayim, Lamar, to tell us the terrible news of Huksa Ha'ir. So on the 5th of the 10th month, the 5th day of the 10th month, that's the 5th of Teves, in the 12th year of Golus, the Polit came from Yerushalayim and notified Yechezkel that the city of Jerusalem had been conquered, the people were put to death at the sword. V'yasu Yom Shmua ki Yom Sreifa. And the Chacham considered the day of which we heard the news, and the Shmua reached the Golus Bavel, the Golim in Bavel. That is a Shmua on the Churban Abayis, and it's considered like the Churban itself, Kiyom HaSreifa. And therefore they established it as its own. And now I can answer the problem that led me to object to Rabbi Akiva's interpretation. It appears to me that my interpretation is more correct than that of Rabbi Akiva. Why? Shani Omer al Rishon Rishon. I'm going through, Zechariah's sequence is reflective of the chronological sequence of events. So the beginning of the Peronios, for which we established a fast day, is Asiri. No, just 1 second. A Rishon lePeronios, sheniskan aperes Rishon toch arba Peronios shalem niskin u'atzos v'al achron. Oh no, I'm sorry. I may have mistakenly said that Teves was first. No. Teves is last. It's Asiri, because this is already after the whole Churban, when the Shmua reached the Golei Bava. So therefore, Achron should be listed as the last of these fast days because that date commemorates the last of the, chronologically, the last of all the events. But Rabbi Akiva has it al Rishon Achron. He's interpreting the Tzomer Avi as the tzom that was established because of Bekias Ha'ir, when the enemy broke through the city. The Al Achron Rishon, and the Tzom Asiri, which is written last in the Pasuk, which was established because of the siege on Yerushalayim, which was Rishon Leperonios, that he has at the end of the list of Zechariah. It doesn't make any sense. Again, Rabbi Akiva insists on establishing that Zechariah's sequence was a reflection of the calendar year, the Seirach Hadashim. And my approach, says Reb Shimon, which I think is better than his, is that it's the Seder HaPeronios. It's the historical sequence of events. Itmar Rav Rabbi Chanina Amri Botla Megillas Tainis. There's a Megillah that was written after the Churban Abayis. I'm sorry, start again. Rav Rabbi Chanina Amri, after the Churban Abayis, Botla Megillas Tainis. Those days that are listed in Megillas Tainis as days in which we celebrate great things that happen, that's only when the Beis HaMikdash stood. Those were days of celebration. They were also best kindness. But today, we're already after the Churban Abayis. Forget about Megillas Tainis. We're allowed to be maspid and fast on any of those days. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yeshua, and Levi Amri, they disagreed. Even after the Churban Abayis, lo botla Megillas Tainis. Rav Rabbi Chanina Amri botla Megillas Tainis. Hachi Kamer, this is what Zechariah Novi meant when he listed all the different fastings. Bisman sheyesh shalom. If there's peace, which means that the Umas HaOlam are not in control, they don't dominate the Jewish people, and the Beis HaMikdash is up and running. Yiul Sasan L'Simcha, those very days are called Moadim, and they're also by a spirit of Tainus. However, Ein Shalom, which means that now there's Churban Abayis, and the nations of the world are subjugating us, then so these days have to be fasted. V'hanach nami, and those happy days of celebration days that are written in Megillas Tainis, they have the same kihani, the same din, and that means that when the Mikdash is stood, those have to be commemorated as celebrations. And now that the Mikdash is gone, they're no longer binding, and the Megillas Tainis is betela, and we can fast and have espedim. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yeshua, and Levi Amri, they hold low part of Megillas Tainis. And you cannot make this equation between the good days, the Moadim days of Megillas Tainis, and the bad days of Megillas Tainis. Ani huda tolinarach one of the binyan Beis HaMikdash. With regard to the 4 designated time periods, which are Noé, and they apply when the Beis HaMikdash, even when the Beis HaMikdash is Kayam. So he says the following: Gabi Abba Moadim Elu Gila Posik Shenogim Rak Bismach Beis HaMikdash Kayam. Shari B'Tchila Nikru Yomim Elu Kitzon V'Avel Churban Yerushalayim Arishon V'Rak Shenivna Beis HaMikdash Nefku Moadim. So, in other words, the whole reason why these days were established as Moadim is because finally the Beis HaMikdash was built, but now the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Just one second. Now it's Beis HaMikdash destroyed. Those days of celebrations are no longer Moadim. Aval Hanach. Just one second. No. Apologize. When I get to this time at the end of a long, I get a little bit flustered. I'm sorry for it. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yishmael ben Levi Ami lo batla Megillus Taimus. Hani hu d'talinu rachmana b'binyan beis hamigdash. These days that are all listed, in other words, in Zechariah Nov, that Rachmana made it dependent on the building of the Holy Temple. Basically, since Zechariah initially initiated his fast days, because the events surrounding the first temple destruction, when the temple was rebuilt, they were converted into festivals. Aval Hanaf Kidakaimi Kaimi. Since these enactments were not in any way linked to the Mikdash, they remained in effect even after the destruction. Okay, Rabbi, we ran out of time, so I apologize. This part of the daf, I'll have to either attach it to tomorrow's shir, or I'm going to have to record it on my own. Okay, then. So thank you very much, and everyone should have a great day.